Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to the second segment of Finding Me on the ITV networks. And today a very special edition to discuss the genocide in Gaza and to show you what the Western mainstream media actually does not want you to know. The question now is, what exactly is the South African government prepared to do to push for the isolation of the Israelis and the apartheid state? To date, the South African government has not echoed the call by the ANC and its tripartite alliance to act against Israel in the same way that the ANC expected of international states to do for them when they were in the liberation struggle. Pretoria is aware that what is happening in Gaza is far worse than what happened during the apartheid years. Let's hear what Normal Finkelstein says in 2012 when he refers back to Operation Castlet that took place in Gaza December 2008 and into January 2009.
And so the first question I think we have to ask ourselves is, was there a war in Gaza? And that's actually an important question, because Israel justified the death and destruction in Gaza by saying that it confronted, and now I'm using its phrase, an asymmetric war in Gaza. And many of Israel's defenders said, yes, there was a lot of death and destruction in Gaza, but that happens in the fog of war. That is, there's lots of confusion on the battlefield. Split-second decisions have to be made. And so, inevitably, if regrettably, innocents get killed and there's a lot of destruction. After those 22 days of death and destruction, many Israeli soldiers testified to what they experienced. So let me quote them. Soldier, there was nothing there. Ghost towns. Except for some livestock, nothing moved. Israel used insane amounts of firepower in Gaza. Israel used insane amounts of firepower in Gaza. The soldiers were interviewed separately. They weren't cueing each other, but the same word leapt to mind for each soldier. Insane amounts of firepower in Gaza. No enemy in the field, no battles, no Arabs to be seen, Arab fighters to be seen anywhere, but they're using insane amounts of firepower. What did Israel do with the white phosphorus? Human Rights Watch wrote a report called Rain of Fire. It said that Israel repeatedly exploded white phosphorus munitions in the air over populated areas, killing and injuring civilians and damaging civilian structures. They dropped the white phosphorus on a school, a market, a humanitarian aid warehouse. They dropped it on Al-Quds Hospital. They dropped it on Al-Wafa Hospital. The hospitals, said Human Rights Watch, were clearly marked, and there does not appear to have been fighting in that immediate area. What happened in Gaza was not a war, and each time any of you uses the locution war to describe what happened in Gaza, you become an agent, wittingly or unwittingly. You become an agent of Israeli propaganda. There was no war in Gaza. There was a massacre in Gaza. 1,400 Palestinians were killed, of whom up to 4/5 were civilians. 358 were children. 13 Israelis were killed, of whom 10 were combatants, and half of the combatants were killed inadvertently by other Israeli soldiers, friendly fire. So 100 Palestinians were killed for each Israeli. 400 Palestinian civilians were killed for each Israeli civilian. Those are not the statistics of a war. Those are the statistics of a massacre.
Noam Finkelstein makes it clear what happened in Gaza was not a war. It was a massacre. What is happening in Gaza right now is not a war. It is a massacre. The ANC has not forgotten its history, that is for sure. But it also does not seem willing, as a majority-led government, to upset the white supremacists who control the world's media and finance, and of course a large part of South Africa's economy. Why is South Africa so afraid to do what it expected of international governments to do for the oppressed during its struggle years? In this regard, then, perhaps one could say, by maintaining ties with the racist Israeli state politically, economically, and diplomatically, South Africa is perhaps complicit in the Israeli war crimes, occupation, apartheid, and colonialism. What has South Africa got to say about Israeli aggression and racist insults on Africans inside of Israel? Let's listen to what David Sheen, a reporter for Haaretz.com, says about this.
I've witnessed, people just go straight up, going up to African people who are minding their own business, not doing anything to anyone, screaming it and yelling it with fierceness and aggression and, all kinds of insults and sexual insults. And it's like a funny joke in the neighborhood to pick up dog feces and throw it at nursing mothers, African women who are nursing their babies. In recent years, non-Jewish African people from East Africa mainly have been entering the country, fleeing persecution, fleeing ethnic cleansing where they themselves originated from, which is, for the most part, Eritrea and Sudan. First of all, they're non-white, so they're suffering from white supremacy. They're not Jewish, so they're suffering from Jewish supremacy. They're not citizens, so they're suffering from nativist supremacy. And they're impoverished. They come with nothing on them. They are the least empowered population in the country and the most vulnerable.
Go back to Sudan. Don't forget.
As long as activists are present, it prevents full-scale violence from happening. As long as media is there, it acts as some kind of stop guard.
He's saying, why am I?
Hardcore activists will start, physically intimidating us, physically, harassing us until it's no longer physically safe to even be there. That's when, the full-scale violence happens. That's when we had, people, 1,000 people running through the streets of South Tel Aviv, running rampant, any store that was owned by an African person, smashing it, stealing stuff, breaking stuff, any African or dark-skinned person that they found, beating them or throwing stones at them or taking beer bottles and smashing it over them. The government, the ruling party, and other parties campaigned on they will take a strong stance, they will prevent more Africans from coming into the country. It's just across the board, from Kadima on the left to Likud, Shas, to pretty much all the center and right-wing Israeli parties vilified African people and advocated expelling them from the country or putting them into internment camps to remove them from the Israeli streets. A statistic that was published 1 week after the pogrom or anti-African riots of May 23rd, something like 52% of Jewish Israelis agreed with a member of Knesset's characterization of African asylum seekers as a cancer in the country. If you can think, essentially cancer is the number one killer of people in at least the developed world, in the Western world, and including in Israel. And here you have a characterization of an entire population of people as being the national equivalent of cancer. Part of the reason at least, why it's so easy for that to become the knee-jerk government response and people's response is that for generations already, that has been the encoded response towards Palestinian people. There are Israelis who are trying to come to the aid of African people, but those Israelis are viewed by a majority of the population as traitors.
At the anti-African rallies we documented, one figure was ubiquitous, a member of Knesset named Michael Ben Ari. In August 2010, we interviewed him at his Knesset office.
יש להם שם בית. מה זה גירוש? איזה גירוש? הם שווים הביתה. כל מדינה בעולם מתוקנת הייתה עושה את זה. נהפוך להיות מדינת הגירה, אבל יש כאלה שעוינים את המדינה. ולכן הם רוצים להפוך אותה למדינת אזרחי כל העולם. נביא לפה 1,000,000 אפריקאים, 500,000 פיליפינים, 2-3 מיליון סינים, ושלום על ישראל.
למה זה מאיים שיהיו פה 1,000,000 אפריקאים?
זה מאיים כי לא תהיה פה מדינה יהודית. המדינה שלנו, תקשיב, המדינה שלנו שונה ממדינות אחרות. המדינה שלנו היא מדינה יהודית ודמוקרטית. זה איזון מאוד מאוד לא פשוט, זה יכול להיות תרתי סתרי במקומות מסוימים. זאת אומרת, דברים סותרים זה את זה במקומות מסוימים. במידה ותביא לפה 1,000,000 אפריקאים, היא תחדל מלהיות יהודית. אנחנו נלחמים, לדוגמה, בתופעה של התבוללות. בעולם ישנה התבוללות של 70-80% במקומות מסוימים בעולם. זאת אומרת, עם ישראל הולך לאיבוד. לי עם ישראל יקר.
Earlier in the year, at an anti-African rally in Tel Aviv that was attended by thousands, Ben Ari was joined by lawmakers from the governing Likud party and other mainstream politicians.
אריתריאה וסודאן זה לא כאן. זה הבית שלנו, כאן זו המדינה שלנו. אבל הדבר החשוב ביותר זה לגרש את המסתננים לארץ ישראל ולשמור על מדינת ישראל כמדינה יהודית.
חברים, אני היום במליאה אמרתי, הסודנים הם סרטן בגוף שלנו.
Minutes after the rally, 1,000 Israelis rioted, attacking African homes and businesses and assaulting any African they found in the street. Here is footage shot by one of the participants in the riot, a supporter of Michael Ben Ari.
Considering the exceptional hatred and ingrained racist beliefs of the Israelis towards Africans, I ask again, why is South Africa dragging its feet on implementing ANC resolutions that demand the government expel the Israeli ambassador and adopt BDS? But let us remember that these attacks will continue, the suffering will continue, the pain and anguish will continue, because not a single Arab leader has the ability to stand up and support the Palestinians. Let's listen to what George Galloway says when he comments on the Arab dictatorships.
As Chris Nynam also said, there are demonstrations all over Europe and North America and the Far East. The one place there are no demonstrations is the Arab world, which is silent whilst this genocide is going on. And the reason for that is that the corrupt kings and the puppet presidents of the Arab world would shoot their people down if they came out to demonstrate. And there will be no freedom for Palestine until these rotten dictatorships are swept away by their people. And may God bless those.
Having heard the voices and pleas of the Palestinians, the voices and pleas of the South African citizens as they have been protesting at Durban, in Sandton, in Cape Town, and in Durban and in front of the Israeli embassy in the coming weeks, I ask again, where is the moral courage of our leaders in South Africa? And when will the Arab populations hold their lackey leaders to account? Stand up, people. Stand up and be counted. I want to play out with the voices of the Palestinians.
فقد كل قرايبه. حياة صعبة كثير يعني.
تخيلت يوم الاجتياحات، تخيلت
تعال اطلع ليش عم نطلع؟
كنت أتمنى